Okay, welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 106. What is the connection between a 50-year mortgage and Al Qaeda joining the White House? Are we in an AI bubble? And what's driving this stock market correction and valuations at the moment? We're going to be going through all of that. So, firstly, let's cover a few news items. What triggered the correction? Everything came off. Long-term rates started going up. It was very similar to Liberation Day, April the 2nd, 2025, when Trump announced and reset the world order for BlackRock and the financial industrial complex. And what did he do? You started to get corrections in the dollar, crashes in the markets, the long-term interest rates started going up, and immediately they had to reverse the policy. They started talking about the trade wars with China, and then you had a massive pump and dump, and then they started to pump liquidity, ease quantitative tightening, push out narratives to reduce rates, start reducing rates, and move closer and closer to quantitative easing, which is probably something we'll be getting very, very soon. And so they will pump liquidity to push the K-shaped economy. So the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Screw the economy. It's all about the stock market. That's sort of fiscal dominance. The government gets bigger. They roll over the debt. And then they require the interest rates, the short-term interest rates, to be low with the Federal Reserve. So Trump starts pushing, more and more banksters into the Fed. Remember, Trump's paid for the banksters because he's part of the banking lobby, is his main backers, as well as the technical lobby, as well as the Israeli lobby. And so he's enforcing those policies. And then what are they going to do? They'll dump it through deregulation onto your pension and stable coins so that you subsidize the below market rate debt because they need the American people to do it. That's why you're seeing massive amounts of Cayman Island volume. The largest lender to the US government is Cayman Island, even though they're lending 1.8 trillion on a tiny economy. That's because it's all the hedge funds and the manipulation and all the financial weapons of mass destruction. Most of the countries, their foreign currencies and their foreign stock markets are going up because they're selling their treasuries. The carry trade is being reversed. And we'll go more about this in the geopolitical section when we cover like the Epstein files. Everybody's being pushed in order to make sure that they stay on track to switch the world to this multipolar world order that BlackRock and the financial industrial complex wants to do us. So what does that mean? It means you need to manufacture chaos within America. And that is Trump is the agent of chaos for the banksters. And so US went into the longest government shutdown that we've ever seen. People weren't getting paid. People weren't able to collect their benefits. And what was that? What is a government shutdown? Well, firstly, it's nothing to do with paying off the debt. It's nothing to do with fiscal conservatism versus socialism. Both the Democrats and the Republicans are two coins of the same party. What they do is they have a different flavor of how to steal money from Americans and give it over to the banks that pay for them through lobbying. And so what were the Democrats doing? So basically, Trump got the debt ceiling up to $5 trillion. They've now America's pushed to $38 trillion of debt. He got the big, beautiful bill, which is a $1.3 trillion stimulus for the proof of weapons network. And then the Democrats lobby in order to get as much of that money over to the insurance companies because they say we're looking after the people. We want Obamacare. We want benefits. And who manages it? The insurance companies manage it. That pumps the price of their stocks, which is owned by the same asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And then they get to manage those benefits, which pumps more and more money over there. Now, on the Republican side, they start fighting with each other. The lobbies control both sides, so it doesn't really matter. But you get to create this illusion that like the left and the right are different. You get to people to buy into it's the Democrats which are creating all this problem with the stock market. And then they get to say it's the Republicans that don't care about the American people when they're all doing identical things with different flavor. What do the Republicans do if they get their way? Well, essentially, they get to pump all the money into the stocks and they get to print just as much because both their job, the uni-party goal, is simply to roll over the debt and push the K-shaped economy so the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It's just a different way of doing it. The asset managers, they win either way, and they get to, they own shares in the banks as well. And then they can push people into ETFs and this passive investment so that they can make sure that the companies are in line with their agenda and they use those financial weapons of mass destruction. So it's the debt ceiling, which is just simply a mechanism for causing friction to get more and more money stolen to roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme. That's all a government shutdown means. And so they announced we're now out of the government shutdown. What does this do? It creates a stimulus, but suddenly you get the hedge funds that are going out there and they're a massive synchronized swimming almost. We're in an AI bubble. So you get all these narratives of we're in an AI bubble from all the nodes in the proof of weapons network, all the hedge funds. And suddenly we get a big correction, which pays into people's fears. You get the hedge fund vigilantes coming out, and you get all of this different thing. Now, what's happening in the real world? Well, in the real world, you had some of the most important players on the proof of weapons network, like Chevron, who are actually going to be launching artificial intelligence data centers in West Texas that is going to be powered by negative price natural gas. So Chevron are coming after AI. And so we're getting this mergence of energy, artificial intelligence, in order to get all this robotics done. So these are strategically important to the proof of weapons network. Do you really think they're going to just put these things into a bubble? This is strategically important to the proof of weapons network. And so this is a pump and dump in order to get more and more of those stocks consolidated further and further up. And you'll see similar things to what we saw last time. They created a reversal of the Japan carry trade and various other things. Now, what else did we see? Follow the money. We got to follow the real money, not what the narratives. SoftBank, which is a big member of the proof of weapons network in Japan, propping up the Japan carry trade, they actually sold some of their NVIDIA stocks into this high inflated price. They sold their position at about $5.8 billion. What did they buy with that $5.8 billion? They bought OpenAI private stock. Why? Because that's going to IPO later at $1 trillion into the strength of the market. So I'm looking for quantitative easing, reduction of interest rate, rolling over the debt, and they're going to go full-blown money printer in order to make the rich richer, the poor poorer, and pump everything back into the stocks. But they use the hedge funds and market manipulation in order to knock people out along the ways with these different types of crashes. Now, what else did we see? In order to knock this off, we had a big announcement from China. Now, remember, in my map of the world, BlackRock is working with BRICS, China, and the GCC. They're moving the world to a multipolar world order. They're engineering capital outflows, but they're pumping Federal Reserve money and the dollar in order to get more and more extracted to asset strip the American people. China, this is what always causes these pump and dump cycles. China announced that it's going to be expanding its rare earth mineral controls. Now, we know all along, if you're a long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk, that the tariff war was never a real war. China had already won, and this was the execution of the strategy via Liberation Day in order to reset the world order and drive all those flows closer to China, which has the manufacturing base with the energy in the Middle East. And then America's going to be shrunk into a regional power because they no longer need the America and the military industrial complex to create genocide all around the world and kill people and do the covert operations, because now they need regional stability in other regions. They'll do a few more missions in order to knock many of these private companies off, but they're trying to consolidate power as they engineer this shift that we've been talking about in the multipolar world order. But they added 5 new critical elements to this rare earth mineral, game. And that really led to part of the correction. Pick whatever narrative you want. What are those rare earth minerals? It was holmium, it was erbium, thallium, europium, ytterbium. Anyway, the end thing is that America said there are 65 different rare earths that we are dependent upon China for, including the military industrial complex, the technical industrial complex, and the financial industrial complex is manufacturing local wars in order to try and get many of those rare earth minerals and components that they need, because China is essentially, this handover's happening with the global south. They were traditionally creating wars and doing, ISIS insurrections to steal resources in Africa, which was all funded by America. We're going to be going deeper into that in the geopolitical section. If you did not see, I'm going to save it for the geopolitical section. Part 3 is going to be epic. The amount of proof we've now got that ISIS and Al-Qaeda were just simply American missions to steal resources is indisputable and irrefutable now. We'll be covering more of that in part 3. With Giuliani joining Trump in the White House, the ex-Al-Qaeda boss. Anyway, they're tightening the rules on semiconductors and defense use. And so this is how you basically get these pump and dump cycles as well. China wants to work with America. China's already won the trade war, but Trump is there to make Americans think something else is happening in the name of MAGA. It basically gives China more and more of a strategic grip on vital tech minerals, but it also allows the proof of weapons network via the financial industrial complex to try and make some of those distressed acquisitions as they negotiate their position with China, so that they control the entire West, partner with the Gulf countries, and partner with China as well. And so they're strengthening these global supply chain dominance. And it's always been the supply chains where we've had these, different fear campaigns and knocking people off the network as well. Now, obviously, BlackRock knows what's going to happen before it happens. So you get the hedge funds out there that are capitalizing, and then you wipe out the ones that are not part of the group, the non-chosen ones as well. Anyway, we're going to have trade talks, and the trade war is not real. We're not entering into World War III. All of these things are resolving these issues as well. But anyway, we had a massive, the same impact that we had on Liberation Day was the same thing that we had, and gold spiked and silver spiked as well. So we're almost back at the highs of 4,200. I think we had a bit of a correction. But anyway, dollar strategically weakened over time. Long-term rates going up. UK is going through the roof. Stock markets up. And then these bonds just being used as a weapon to roll over the debt, make the government bigger, hand over all the money to the private corporate sector, vassalize countries further and further and further, and keep utilizing the dollar to create the K-shaped economy while civil unrest is being manufactured. And then we get the rise of other regions with all of these capital outflows that are driving foreign stock markets higher and higher and higher. So anyway, this is all part of what I believe to be the financial industrial complex dollar weakening campaign. As I said, almost all foreign stocks are outperforming the S&P at the moment. And the stock market looks like it's reaching new all-time highs. But if you price it in gold, you'll realize that this is the devaluation of the dollar. That's the trade. We're starting to see less and less, because the dollar's being strategically weakened. I think a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the impact on the petrodollar and the depegging. I'll make sure we get a blog on that, just on the depegging and the petrodollar. One of the most important things to track. And I'll make sure we get a blog published next week, because I went into that on a previous episode, and I think it's really worth digging deeper into. I've been publishing blogs where I take out parts, create like AI summaries so that we can have shorter forms, and then you can dig deeper into the longer. We published one on, for example, the 12-day war. I'm going to give you a bit of summary in the geopolitical section. Anyway, sanctions on Iranian oil. Iranian oil, is they're completely failing. They're not working at all. You'll notice across social media, there'll be little talks about what is Iran up to with these oil tankers and stuff. Essentially, the network of BRICS have proven that via China, you can set up these networks where they don't interfere in each other's geopolitics, but they allow for trade to flow, which will be a much, much better, it's a much better of the world. Global hegemon is awful for the world. Dollar dominance has been really, really bad for so many countries. But now when we move to multipolarity and competition, we're seeing that you can have these different trade flows without countries having to blow each other up in order to eliminate competition. It's about building up, which is why I'm very, very bullish of where this actually goes. But I just know because the proof of weapons network controls the West, it's bleak for the West as when you follow the monetary flows. They ain't going to tell you that. But also sanctions on Russia. The gas, it's just not working anymore. Europe is still dependent upon it. Imports are still flowing. They're pretending that America is sanctioning US. They're pretending that they're sanctioning Russia. Europe is pretending they're sanctioning Russia. But that BRICS network has been created. The debt to GDP in Russia is going down. The economy's going stronger. It's got the wartime economy, but it's subsidized through the BRICS relationships as well. And so they've unified around de-dollarization and partnered with the Gulf countries. And now Iran, through China, is now normalized with Saudi Arabia, which historically was the destabilization campaign. Now that doesn't exist. You're starting to see all of these different moves. But anyway, Iran, basically their exports of oil hit their highest level since 2018. You started to see some escalations with Russia in Kiev. Save that one for the geopolitical stuff. It's absolute tragedy what's happening in Ukraine. Essentially, BlackRock is acquiring more and more land. Russia's going to end up with more and more land. And the proof of weapons network doesn't care about Ukrainian lives, as it just pushes out useful idiots that think that they're defending democracy while the military industrial complex is getting more and more to pump into the stock market. All this to say is that the whole climate change narrative, the whole peak oil narrative, suddenly they've disappeared because the whole goal is artificial intelligence, energy, rare earth minerals, semiconductor chips, because the goal is to replace all jobs with robotics and artificial intelligence, and that requires AI chips. That's the transition that you need to be protecting yourself. So the whole narrative of peak oil, the FUD around that is completely disappeared right now because they're pushing energy. The whole ESG thing, that was just a BlackRock way of redistributing. Only China was building renewable energy because they are actually using renewable energy. In terms of in Europe, it was just to destroy the European economy, cut off its gas using its its relationship with its reliance on Russia through Germany, knock off those nodes, and now they're complete vassal states as well. And ESG has always been a narrative to redirect capital flows. They made trillions of dollars off it. But now suddenly no one's talking about climate change, and no one's talking about ESG, and no one's talking about peak oil, because these are just narratives in order to reset capital flows. Right. Everything is about AI, energy, and data. Data centers are going to be geopolitically prioritized over everything. And so the real narrative came out this week in order to correct the stock market, because the valuations of AI dependent companies, whether it be military AI through Palantir, whether it be NVIDIA through data centers, whether it be others, there was a real AI bubble narrative that was pushed out. Now, the guy from The Big Short that shorted, predicted the global financial crisis, got a Hollywood production and made his name for it, Michael Burry, he basically just bet $1.1 billion that the AI revolution is a complete lie. Now, it's not that the technology is a lie, it's that he believes that the valuation is a lie. probably about 80% of his entire portfolio, it basically now sits on put options against Nvidia and Palantir. And then he had a capitulation where he basically quit the game, published out a letter, and everyone was talking about it because he got the short. And now I think he's saying, I don't get these markets. Nothing makes sense. I saw the one in the global financial crisis, but there's nothing that's moving in line with that. What it is that he didn't predict is corruption. The fact that the Fed owns everything and we privatize the losses and socialize the gains. And so you can be right in your analysis, but they don't realize how centralized, fraudulent, and ridiculous the dollar proof of weapons network is. He thinks it's still capitalism. And so therefore he uses the types of tools that we were taught when I did my degree in economics and I did my financial planning qualifications. And when I worked in investment banking, I worked on the trading side and the corporate finance side. We used to use, PE ratios. We used to use things that would have the asset values, and we used to use these things to value companies. But people basically are still in that old paradigm because that was how we used to push out these analysts that would create buy, sell, hold recommendations. And then we could use those in order to push people into markets and do all sorts of stuff. And so these were the previous tools that Wall Street would use. But now the investment paradigm is basically completely shifted. It's not about market rationality. It's not about any of these things. It's not about earnings per share. It's not about any of these different types of tools that would be used by financial analysts. And interestingly, they had a chartered financial analyst that was kicking people off the CFA network because they were told that they have to treat fiat currencies as non-volatile and that Bitcoin is too volatile. Where the CFA was I posted it on my X, the CFA qualified person in the Chartered Financial Analyst Institute, they were telling that you're not allowed to recommend Bitcoin because it's too volatile. Anyway, what are the key things that actually determine the valuations in a market where the proof of weapons network has fully vassalized all the governments? Well, it's actually about privatizing assets that give the proof of weapons network monopoly and critical control over infrastructure and geopolitical rails and strategic choke points. And so they will never let Nvidia, be taken down because this is proven to be a very important way of getting data centers built geopolitically and geostrategically, not for the country, but for the proof of weapons network. They need Nvidia to be building them around the world. And so they basically create, as I've always said, financial weapons of mass destruction. And if the company does not play along, then they can collapse the share price. And the stock, will continue to go up if they play ball. And so now you've entered into this world where essentially share price is based upon your compliance with the proof of weapons network, which requires you to borrow against your stock so that they can issue you, and the richest people in the world turn them into blackmail and debt slaves in order to fulfill their agenda, so that then they can say, well, we'll take out your net worth based upon levering up, as they do with all these different entrepreneurs at the moment. And so the share price is based upon compliance with the proof of weapons network. That was what ESG was. It was comply with our requirements and you'll get access to the capital. Don't comply, you won't get access to the capital. It will cost you your share price. It will cost you your net worth. And we need you in debt by borrowing against your stock. The same thing they're doing to you by getting you to borrow against your Bitcoin so that you custody it with them. And then they issue you debt so that they can wipe you off the network when they need to, when they want to centralize a bit more of those weapons. And so if anyone defies, like maybe, I don't know, but maybe Elon Musk wasn't meant to talk about the Epstein list Maybe he went rogue. Maybe it was a wild card. But when he did talk about it, the Tesla price went down. And so they can engineer compliance, because who's on the Epstein list? Well, it's the banksters. It's the technical industrial companies. It's the Peter Thiels. It's the Bill Gates. It's the Jamie Dimons. It's the JP Morgans. It's the Lex Wexners. It's the donor class. It's the lobbies. Everyone's waiting for some Hollywood movie. They care about the celebrities, but we've covered this. Anyway, I'll go more about that in the geopolitical section. So maybe Elon went off script to try and get some more power with the network. His share price comes down, and he then doesn't get his share options. They could bribe the court or whatever it is with his salary case at the moment, but they can knock you off the network in these, in the proof of weapons network. And then they can signal, get in shape, or we'll make Larry Ellison the richest person, and he's going to be given TikTok. Now, you need to make sure that we can use X for everybody's social credit score. And we're going to make sure that only Larry Ellison via Oracle gets the TikTok US arm, so that he can build out our algorithm for manufacturing civil unrest or political goals, or knocking people off the network, destroying their reputations in these blackmail rings. But if you defy, then your stock price gets tanked, and you're in leverage, and so you have to comply. And that's essentially the mafia of the proof of weapons network, and that was all done through this privatization, securitization, and financialization. And that's the Oracle and Tesla example that you're seeing. Now, people have so much faith in the system, they think it's about earnings per share, and so they're using old analysis rather than following geopolitics. And I've always said, follow the money. It's why whenever I used to go on those spaces with all the traditional analysts, they just call me a conspiracy theory and say, no, the world doesn't work that way. And they would look at the traditional. But that's why I always spend my time on following the money, because it helps you see past media narratives. Media is what they want you to believe. Remember, in the Financial Times, it's not truth. It's what the banks want you to believe and where they want you to flow your capital. It's just signal. And they kind of use news stories and earnings per share and the traditional. You need to understand how the financial industrial complex works. These different types of matrices. And that's why we'll always be following the money, and we combine the Bitcoin side, the macro side, with the most important geopolitical side, because markets are driven now by geopolitics, which is controlled by the proof of weapons network. So anyway, at the moment, AI is about their long-term control. And so, they want control over some of the regional blocks wherever they can, BRICS, GCC. But they also need these companies in order to negotiate. So the reason, Trump is executing the Gulf plan with the financial industrial complex is because they want to build those data centers and they want to get access to those nuclear energy. And so by controlling these $5 trillion companies, that is their leverage point in negotiating these blocks when they move to the multipolar world order, which they're engineering, just like you witnessed with the pound. The Bank of England bankrupted the UK government and then engineered the pound into a regional currency from global reserve currency, and then took all the gold and put it in the American empire, and then needed the wars in order to reset the world order. So anyway, stocks like Nvidia, Oracle, Meta, these are strategically important companies. And so they're saying AI bubble. Yes, you'll get market manipulations, but they need these companies for as long as possible because they are geopolitically and strategically important for the proof of weapons network to negotiate with the regional blocks. And these corporate entities is what they need, is where they get their leverage from in order to negotiate the system. So anyway, what does this mean? It means that they're essentially immune from poor financial performance. So whatever they do, whatever they say, it doesn't really matter because they're relevant. And so they will protect the share price. So how do they protect the share price? Well, they protect the share price in the debt-based Ponzi scheme by printing money. And so that's why we're going to move over to quantitative easing, because the stock market can't go down. Because who's the Federal Reserve? The Federal Reserve pretends it's about inflation and employment, but who are the shareholders of the Federal Reserve? The banks. The banks that control the lobby that control the politicians, Senate, Congress, and can bribe through their black op operations, judicial as well. And so the money printer turns on, and that's how you protect the share price. So the money printer will turn on until you can't roll over, and they're hedging in other markets as well. And gold and Bitcoin is the liquidity sponge in these transitions for different people on the network. And so the Fed has to keep interest rates down. It's not because Trump's forcing them down. It's because the banks want them down, and they need a narrative to make it look like Trump's taking on the banks while he works for the banks. And so they need to buy more bonds and buy more bonds in order to make money cheaper. And when money is cheaper, that means that the stocks go up, but only the stocks that are strategically important. The other get wrecked by the hedge funds. So it's about consolidating power. The second thing, what do? Well, they use the index funds. There's a reason why BlackRock in the 2008 financial crisis took out Barclays iShares, because they want the ETFs. The ETFs are about using the insurance markets, the pension markets, the endowment markets, and various other cash flows from retail investors to invest in their index funds so that they end up with the board seat, they end up with the voting rights, they end up with the largest shareholding for the ETF, and then they can determine through S&P what gets in. And they can knock people off the S&P or knock them in the S&P depending on compliance and strategic importance. Now, once you're in the S&P, you get the passive income, which means everybody gets forced to buy those stocks through these passive pension funds and vehicles. They can't leave. They can only leave if they get knocked off the network. And so this is what the S&P 500 and the index funds are all about. Is basically forced to buy more, and the stock goes up. So you've got money printing, then you've got the index funds, and then you've got basically a one-way facet of dollar printing into the stock market with the K-shaped economy. What's the third thing they can do? Basically, bad news gets ignored. They can control the media, and they can use market manipulation in order to correct the price and pump the price using the hedge fund network that we covered. So it really doesn't matter whether there's missed earnings or anything like that, good earnings, bad earnings, whether there's a drop in sales, an increase in sales. Is just geopolitically and strategic importance, and making sure anyone that has a choke point will be important. That's why X is important. That's why XAI is important. That's why OpenAI is important. That's why these different choke points. That's why the phones with Microsoft, the computers, with Microsoft and various other Apple and various other things. Okay, right. Now, how are you going to roll over the network? So we're starting to see real signs of liquidity distress within the banking market as well. That's another fear factor that's being pushed into it. This is to drive us to lower rates, quantitative easing, and pump up the stock market, but knock some people off the network as it goes. And then those index funds will kick in and money printing will kick in. So what did we get an announcement of? Trump decided he's got to float a 50-year mortgage. So let's go into the 50-year mortgage and tie this all together. So the narrative is that it's going to help young people in order to get access to affordable housing. This is what was done by Franklin D. Roosevelt after the Roaring 20s, the stock market crash, and the Great Depression. It had gold confiscation, and then they increased the mortgages to 30-year mortgage. And the narrative, of course, was that it helped millions of Americans in order to afford more homes and get out of the Great Depression. So they stimulated the Great Depression with the debt-based Ponzi scheme. The debt has gone up and up and up. Now America's 38 trillion. So you create war, you create stimulus through real estate, and then the banks get to create more dollars every time they issue a loan. The interest to pay off the debt doesn't exist, so you need to keep rolling it over. So what does this actually mean? So let's say you took out a $400,000 mortgage, and it would be, for a 50-year, you'd imagine that it would be at about 7% interest. because the longer the duration of the mortgage, the higher the interest has to, the interest has to be. But you can spread it out over 50 years, so your monthly payment is lower. It means that you just pay interest for an incredibly long time, and you spread it out over your whole life, and you work for the bank for your whole life. Now, some people will say, yeah, but I don't want the duration of the whole mortgage. I just want the lower payment now. That's the carrot, and the stick is that you end up enslaved to the bank. Now, under a 30-year mortgage, if you were to buy that house, that $400,000 house, you would basically pay $558,000 in your lifetime interest. So you pay over the value of the house over 30 years. So $558 in interest, $400,000 in your house. And you hope that over 30 years, because it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme backed by real estate, that the value of your house over that 30 years is a lot more. And if it beats inflation, then you roll over the debt and you keep pushing out equity in order to refinance. The bank gets all their interest and they keep rolling over. And if ever they get it wrong, like they did in 2007, 2008, then the government bails them out, socialize the losses, socialize the losses and privatize the gains. Now, let's say you got the same house, but you did it with a 50-year. Under a 50-year, by adding the additional 20 years, you pay $1.16 million in lifetime interest, which means that your $400,000 house costs you about $1.6 million with a 50-year mortgage. You basically pay double the amount of interest that you would have paid if you were under a 30-year mortgage. So you're rolling out, and you're giving people relief by having a lower payment up front. This turns basically a 50-year mortgage, and you get to push out the narrative, because what are people going to do with that? Well, the real savvy people are going to take the savings and buy assets. Almost everyone else is going to buy groceries, and those groceries are going to be bought on credit cards. So you're paying interest on interest on interest, and the K-shaped economy gets worse and worse and worse. But it gives them a little bit of relief so that they can use you to roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme a little bit worker. But it looks like a gift, and that gift is leading into the midterm elections. And so it's not a gift. It looks like a gift. It can be a gift if you understand how the monetary flows work. But it's basically a $1 trillion bailout for Wall Street and the banks, dressed up as if it's some kind of tax cut. So let's look at that. So basically, the banks and the hedge funds are drowning in these mortgages that they did when the interest rates were locked in at approximately 2 to 3%, these old mortgages. And they basically got all these 2 to 3% mortgages, which is, potentially could wipe out some banks if there's any liquidity issues. But what would save them? If they could roll them over at 6 to 7% interest. And basically these old loans, they're worth, if you look at this, about 50 to 60 cents on the dollar. I got this example from Evan on X, and I'll put some links in the blog as well. But basically, they're now sitting on $1 to $2 trillion across the banking system in these types of mortgages, and they're losing losses. They're getting their losses, and you could just basically wipe out. And so this is a banker's bonus. This is 100%. If this goes through, I'm not sure if it goes through, but this is definitely a proof of weapons network initiative marketed by Trump for the financial industrial complex. And maybe they're looking at taking Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, making them public, merge them in, roll over, get the government to socialize the losses, construct some 50-year treasuries, see if they can get the demand there. I'm not sure where the demand's going to come for a 50-year government treasury to offset it. But anyway, these are the types of things that they're looking to do that. You could have banks wiped out if they don't with these different things. So it is a bank bailout by doing this. Yeah. Anyway, if you can get everyone over to a 50-year mortgage, they can refinance at the higher rates. They can be stuck in loans. They can then put it through the financial industrial complex, put it into mortgage-backed securities, roll it up, and BlackRock and PIMCO and all of the other parts of the financial industrial complex and the big banks, they can instantly basically get hundreds of billions of dollars with no work. So this is beautiful for them. Basically, you pay interest for 50 years if you actually want to own this whole house. Your kids basically end up, because most people, in the 50 years, it will pass on to their kids. They'll still be paying the debts. You're passing on to your grandchildren and the next generation or intergenerational mortgages. It could move over to 100-year. It could move over to lifetime mortgages if they can get this right. And sometimes you can never actually move or change jobs easily because basically breaking a 50-year loan comes with a massive, cost. And they basically, if you pay it off early or you move or you do any of that, there's a massive penalty for paying off early because they factor that into the equation. And so in some cases, you can't even move. And that's where people are right now. They can't move even though they want to because they're locked into their mortgages. And if they remortgage it, they'll be paying at the highest rate. So this is kind of closer to a form of debt slavery that the Federal Reserve always wanted to create it when the banks created this model and made the dollar a debt-based Ponzi scheme based upon what they did in the UK. Anyway, your house doesn't get any cheaper. If you want to actually deal with affordable housing, you make houses cheaper. That's the real way to do it. But the banking system is backed by housing, and that has to go up, and they have to roll over the debt because it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme. And that's why the proof of weapons network is hedging into multipolarity, because the writing's on the wall for how long they can do this. They'll do it for as long as they can, but they've got to hedge and make sure that when they're ready, the Fed for the banks can just rug pull the system. And normally they'd want to do a managed transition, but they'll keep juicing it until there's civil unrest. Hence, you got the surveillance state, AI, robotics, and all those other things that are strategically important for the goals. So prices continue to skyrocket for real estate, which is what the banks need. It's what the individuals need. But now you got, basically a 50-year mortgage, which means a bigger loan. And first-time buyers still, get crushed. You just got to pay a higher price. They won't let the real estate market crash because they can't move to deflation. The only deflation they can do is AI and oil prices. But we're starting to see that the oil strategic reserves, the strategic petroleum reserves for America are really, really low right now. Now they're doing drill, baby, drill. But if the prices go down, that will create bankruptcies, consolidation of power up to Chevron, Exxon. What about AI? That's how you end up with robotics, AI. So of course, they're not going to allow this to reflect earnings per share. They need to pump the AI bubble. They need to keep it going. And they will socialize the losses and privatize the gain. It is illegal for these stocks to go down long term. So we will move into QA and you will pay it if you don't own those assets. BlackRock and Wall Street will undergo a massive bailout paid for by Main Street. It's 2008 again, and the stocks will pump. And this is why, people that traditionally are looking for their big short or something, they fail to recognize how fraudulent, centralized, and unethical the market has actually become. Mortgage companies will basically collect 50 years of servicing fees. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they'll be merged, put into an IPO. More of it will float. And then you can privatize, the gains, but socialize the losses. You put it in the index fund, it will be controlled by BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And now you got the banks, the real estate, the technical industrial complex, the military industrial complex. And this is further, and the government is the piggy bank that's getting bigger and bigger and deeper into debt, but you're not even getting any of that money reinvested into infrastructure or Americans or anything. And of course, Trump looks like a hero because he's delivering the narrative and basically the biggest wealth transfer from the average American people over to billionaires in history. And people will cheer it on. Now, what is the hack? People will say, well, I can pay off faster by investing in assets because I've got a lower monthly cost. And they'll use that. And that is actually true. And so that is the hack. But what is this system? The system is that they're trying to draw you into the system of in-debt slavery. So you continue to pay the interest. You continue to have the high penalty fee if your assets outstrip. You continue to use the ATM. And then you get them to manage your money in order to try and outperform the interest that you're paying. So obviously, the right thing to do if you're savvy is to save the money and then invest it in assets so that you can outperform inflation and you can get yourself out of the hamster wheel. But this is using leverage. Obviously, that's the hack. So, of course, the hack also serves Wall Street. So either way, what they really don't want you doing, though, is basically they want you to invest. They don't want you to invest the difference in Bitcoin unless it's via the ETF. So then they can use it to get a JP Morgan loan to pay off your long-term loan, lever up further, and use their financial weapons of mass destruction. This is the centralized Bitcoin industrial complex that they're building, and you combat it by owning it in self-custody. So you could take on the debt, reduce the rate, and then buy Bitcoin in self-custody. That's what they don't want you to do. That's why they got Genius Act and Clarity Act and all those other things. So let's give an example. I'll just give an example. I got this from somebody on X as well. I'll try and give credit in the blog as well. But basically, monthly payments, imagine you're paying a 6% interest on a 500K home. Now, if you had a 30-year mortgage, you would be paying $2,997.75. Now, let's say instead you elected to roll over into a 50-year mortgage. Now, I don't know what the rate will be, but let's assume it's a similar rate. Then you will have $2,632. And the monthly difference is approximately $365.73. So the total interest that you'll be paying on a 30-year interest is $579,190.95. So let's say $580,000 is the total interest you pay on buying a $500,000 house. But if you now do it under a 50-year interest, you pay over $1 million, $1,079,000. So you pay double the amount of interest, but now you get the lower payment up front. Now, the extra interest from choosing the 50-year option is approximately $500,000. So you're paying double in that example. But if you're structuring the loan under 50 years, you pay the extra $500,000 in interest. So that goes to the bank. The bank obviously loves it. That's the bank bailout. But if you take that basically $365 of interest that you save, and you basically get that monthly saving because you're spreading it over 50 years rather than 30 years. And let's say you decided to invest it into Bitcoin in self-custody, which is what they don't want you to do. Now, they don't mind you doing it because they get a higher interest, but also you escape the system. Now, few will do this. This may end up that you end up a high net worth investor. And that's how you end up on the right side of the proof of weapons network. Now, they'd rather you do it through their stock so they control you. But again, I can't promise what will happen to Bitcoin. I just know that I will buy it every single month, and I think it will outperform most markets over a 4-year cycle if you dollar cost average and ignore the price. Now, conservatively, some people say that, a CAGR, which is a compounded annual growth rate, in Bitcoin is estimated to be 20% for 30 years. I said, not financial advice, forward-looking statement. Do your own research. You decide whether that will happen. I believe that's pretty conservative, and I believe that can continue to happen. Now, what this would mean over that 30 years is that you end up, if it goes at 20% and you just invest the difference, your Bitcoin at the end of the 30 years would be worth $8.4 million. So the trade-off is basically you pay the bank $500K more, and they know this. So this is what the smart people will be doing, but they know what everyone else will be doing, and they win either way. This is why it's a bank bailout. So you pay $500K additional in interest, but you end up with, if that 20% model happens, and it won't go like that, as I said, not financial advice, do your own research, you make your own projections, but you'd end up with $8.4 million in Bitcoin. Now, even if the compounded annual growth rate, the CAGR of the BTC, of the Bitcoin, it gets you basically $1 million status. So you become a millionaire after 18 years, and you get to escape the proof of weapon network, become an accredited investor, and all those different things. And so that's just with the additional contribution by rolling it over. And of course, they know that. They know that. And so the system is enslave. The solution is Bitcoin in self-custody, if it works that way. You know, that's what you have to do, I guess, if you're in this situation. Now, if you're a long-term listener, you won't need to do that because you built the wealth effect. You've been buying Bitcoin every month, and you're able to boycott the system without the debt. But I recognize that this is about practicality and reality. And so I just wanted to give the example of what people will be doing to escape the system. This is basically a 50-year mortgage and instead of 30 years. And you basically get to stack 365 more per month in Bitcoin, that if it does compound at 20% annually for 50 years, your final stack could become, so if you did it for the whole 50 years rather than 30 years, in that scenario, and this is crazy, I just want to give you the number to highlight what long-term planning is. It won't work like this, but I just want you to get into the habit of buy every month regardless of price. But if you did it for the whole 50 years and invested that, and it did get the 20% return, in 50 years from now, you'd have $445 million. And everyone else is focusing on gambling on shitcoins and crypto. And this is the importance of long-term thinking and understanding and working through follow the money. And but everyone wants to get rich quick. And this is why you got to start with that 4-year, buy Bitcoin each month, regardless of price, and get a little bit smarter. And hopefully you don't need to do it with the 50-year mortgage. I don't know whether this is going to happen or not. But they want you to invest the difference with them. And so the boycott is do it in self-custody. And you don't make them more powerful. And hopefully it outperforms the interest, and you can play the game that they know you're going to play. Obviously, you're paying interest to the bank, so it's not a full boycott. You know what my ideal is, but this is just about being better given your current circumstance rather than perfection. You know, we don't not do things because we're not getting it perfect. Okay. Now, I just want to give the other side of this. Most people just won't do that. We know what most people are going to do. The vast majority will roll over their debt, take on the 50-year mortgage. They'll pay the additional interest to the bank. They'll be in debt slave for the rest of their life. They'll pass on the debt to their children, to potentially to their grandchildren. And what are they going to do with the difference? They'll receive some relief, which is what the original purpose is. And then they'll use that to consume, or they'll pay off some of their credit cards, or they'll just consume on more credit cards. So they'll spend their entire lives rolling over their debt and their children's lives, pass on the debt in there, and basically working for banks forever. And so while you may get your freedom of speech and believe you've got freedom, remember the Constitution didn't protect you. It protected you from the tyranny of government. But who were the people, who were the founding fathers? They were the banks at the times, the elites at the time, the landowners, the corporate class of today. And so they didn't protect you from the tyranny of the government being controlled by the elites and the corporations. And so now you got covert enslavement via debt slavery. And that was always the game. That's always been the central banking game. So the only rational option, as we see, is to invest the difference. They'd prefer you to do it in the S&P 500 so that they can give themselves more power through these index funds in order to build the proof of weapons network. And if you are going to go to gold, they want you to do it via their gold ETF. And if you are going to go to Bitcoin, they want you to go via their Bitcoin. Your job is to do it in self-custody, of course. It will always be a bank bailout. This is how you socialize the losses and privatize the gains, whether you get a massive systemic risk event. It will always be done this way because that's the nature of the debt-based Ponzi scheme, because the government is the banks. They're owned by the banks, and no one's bigger than that. And 95% of people will just take the extra payment. Maybe they'll use it in order to try and pay down some of their mortgage and get more equity in it. But we know what's going to happen. The prices are going to go up. They're going to lie to you about consumer price inflation. And in 18 to 24 months, something's going to come up. Maybe you don't get your Medicare. Maybe you don't, whatever it is. You get some kind of tragedy that means you need to pay for a hospital bill. Maybe there's something that the kids need to pay for. Maybe there's the college. Maybe there's the new car that you need to get. And maybe there's a medical bill. And that's what 95% of people are going to do. So it is 100% a bank bailout. It is to refinance those 2 to 3% mortgages and get them at 6 to 7%. Get a small percentage of people utilizing it for Bitcoin and self-custody and beating the proof of weapons network. But virtually everyone will not pay down more of their equity and end up right back at the same thing where they're just paying the interest and paying the minimum they can because inflation won't take over, and then they'll refinance their house and use it as their ATM. And so if you've got a 400K house, you're buying it for $1.6 million. Trump gets to say this is a solution for affordable rather than dealing the root cause of the problem, which is that you need house prices to reflect reality of wages. And that's why they tell you the stock market and GDP is their measure of success and whether we're in a recession. It's a hidden recession. It's a covert Great Depression. And it's most people that are impacted by it, while Trump tells you this is the best economy ever. And anyway, we don't know what the rate will be on the 50-year mortgage. It's probably going to be something like 7 to 8.5%. Who knows? Because, if you asking the banks to take longer duration risk, they basically have to do a higher rate and they have to come up with another product, and then they'll have to create some kind of way of doing it. Why? Because you might pass away, you might default, your house could get flooded, there could be a natural disaster. So they have to charge a higher rate. So it will come with a higher rate, or it will be subsidized by the government, which is essentially socialism under the Republican Party for the rich and banks. That's always been the game. The banks get socialism, and you get to defend and say, don't give me any money because that's communism and socialism. So you get the worst of both worlds. You don't even get the benefits from the money printing unless you can play this game, which most people aren't playing the game. This is generational debt, and a 50-year mortgage, it's a loan. It's a lifetime submission to Wall Street. You don't own the house. The whole time you have a mortgage, the bank owns you and they own the house. And it's for half a century. As I said, the solution is to make houses affordable again. But, the only way to actually do that, the only way they can do that instead, They'll just stretch the term and keep the price going up. That's just the reality. If they actually wanted affordable housing, what would they do? Well, there's $2 trillion of mortgage-backed securities on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. They would continue into quantitative tightening and sell down, and that would drive the price down. BlackRock is buying it up through mortgage-backed securities via your ETF. You see why I say boycott the system, because you're perpetuating the system, which is causing this late enslavement. And so if you really wanted to solve affordable housing, you just end the commoditization. You end the mortgage-backed security. You end using pensions via index funds to invest in these investment banking products, which brings us back to Michael Berry, because he saw where the mortgage-backed securities and the credit default swaps and what happened. He shorted, but he didn't predict that the extent of the corruption and socialization of the losses and privatization of the gain. So that is never going to happen. And this is why the game is Bitcoin in self-custody. The real estate is the backbone of the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And so what is Trump going to do as we move to this potential universal basic income? He's going to roll it over into stable coins, deregulate to dump more onto your pension, force you into it, maybe create the 50-year treasury product if he can find the demand. Where's the demand going to come from? Maybe they'll just stick it in your pension, whatever they can do, and they'll get you to subsidize the low rate, which is why they want to pump down the short-term rate, which subsidizes the debt on the long term and the short term. And so the banks will be figuring out what they're going to do in all of that. But what did Trump do anyway? What did he announce? $2,000 tariff dividend for all Americans right before the midterm election. How's this going to be funded? Well, Trump said that it's going to be funded by U.S. tariff revenues. It's complete deceit, complete lie. We know that the debt's going up. In order to have world reserve currency, Triffin's dilemma, you have to have a twin fiscal deficit and trade deficit. And all that's doing is the deficit's going up to roll over the debt. And nothing stops this train. So it's not funded by tariffs, because although money is coming in, there's $350 billion approximately that has come in. But remember who paid it? American business, which is sending American business into mergers and acquisitions. And the large companies, which will be able to offset the tariffs, they're buying the export distressed companies into the proof of weapons network and driving the world over to China and BRICS. And that was always the goal. That was always the goal. So what did we do? I'll just give the quote. So Trump comes out on Truth Social, his social network, and said that the US is collecting trillions of dollars in tariffs. They're not collecting trillions of dollars. There hasn't been trillions of dollars in tariff. And that they will use the trillions of dollars of money to reduce the national debt. They can't pay off the national debt. That would collapse the entire economy. It's a debt-based Ponzi scheme, and reward its citizens. It's not going to reward its citizens. It's going to create inflation. It will be paid for by debt, and it will reward the banks. And it's a stimmy check, a stimulus of the market that will create inflation, that will wreck those in debt in the short term. And he said it's going to be excluding high income earners. Fine. Okay. Then you should exclude the high income earners. That's the first thing he said true for if he ends up doing it, but they're getting the stimulus check from their stocks. He did this during COVID. This happened during COVID under Biden as well. So Trump called tariff. Basically, he then started talking about the tariff critics, and he said that they are fools, and claimed that the US is now the richest, most respected country in the world. And what did he do to use that metric? He cited their stock market. And so the stock market is the only metric: fiscal dominance, larger government, debt-based Ponzi scheme, roll over the debt, push it into stocks, and then 401k values go up. And then they can dump more of those low paying treasuries and various other weapons that they're doing, and the private equity, of course, as well. I personally believe that if this $2,000 does actually happen, it will maybe be done via a stable coin, hence the the crypto policy. That's a bit of speculation on my behalf. Why wouldn't they? And it basically becomes a universal basic income beta test for the stablecoin surveillance state as these trends push forward. So I wonder if it will be paid by a stablecoin. That would be very interesting. That's why you're getting Clarity and Genius Act. But what are they actually doing? They're inflating away the debt through fiscal dominance with a MAGA sticker on top of it, wrecking Main Street and handing over to Wall Street with a bank bailout and fiscal dominance and pumping up the stock prices. But I don't know if this will actually happen because it actually requires congressional approval. And my understanding of US politics is it probably won't pass. So it's just something that they're saying, and then maybe MAGA people are saying it like it's happening. So it may be just a political maneuver. But then that brings us into the interms and the fact that maybe you can never get any of these policies actually through, because if the interms doesn't go in favor of the Trump administration, then it's never going to happen. And MAGA maybe start spending it like it's going to happen, believing that they're going to get their $2,000 relief. That was the promise under Doge. And Doge was just a mechanism for getting all of that data into the social credit score, handing it over to Palantir, handing it over to the artificial intelligence algorithms, and weakening the dollar. So that's what really is going to happen when you follow the money. We covered a lot of ground in This Week in Macro. We covered whether there's an artificial intelligence bubble, whether this will lead to a stock market recovery, whether the 50-year bailout was a bailout for the banks, and how to think about valuations and what the key metrics are in This Week in Macro. So I hope you enjoyed that. And now we're going to tie it all together. If you watch This Week in Bitcoin, you can see the technical side that's happening. Then we covered This Week in Macro, the 50 years. And now I'm going to make a very strange connection. In This Week in Geopolitics, I'm going to be covering how we get from 9/11 to the head of Al-Qaeda being in the White House, and what's happening right now on the geopolitical side, and how that actually relates to understanding how to follow the money in macro via geopolitics. Because the traditional analysis that Wall Street are using no longer works. So I'm going to take a quick sip of water. And then what I'd love for you to do is, while I'm doing that, put a comment below, retweet, please share. I rely upon your traffic in order to do this. Also, follow me on Rumble. If you want to download these things, because it's too much in one go, I know I drop a lot on you. I break it down. I upload them to YouTube. You can also download them on Spotify or Apple iTunes. And also, I back everything up on simondixon.com. And also, if you'd like a free membership to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, it's completely free. You can get a free digital copy of my book, a backup of all the content in case we get banned, and also a completely free course on Bitcoin and self-custody. No sponsorship, no upsell, no agenda, no sponsors, no monetization. Just building a community of people that are going to own more Bitcoin this month than the next month, and are really analyzing the geopolitics so that we can have better access to information. Also, follow me on X if you want the real-time updates. And then we're going to move over, and I'll be back very shortly in a second with This Week in Geopolitics.